Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, weiss-sound.com and weissadvice.com. We are very close to launch officially. Everything is working. The hard launch is going to be October 1st, and there's going to be a nice discount code where all the early subscribers, you guys who have been rocking with me during this transitionary phase, well, you guys are going to get 33% off. I certainly appreciate your support. Okay, so today's video is going to be about aligning drums, live recordings, and getting that phase right. So time alignment and phase alignment are not necessarily the same thing. We are going to demonstrate that idea, but they are very, very closely related. The idea being that as a sound is forming, when we have multiple mics on the same sound, in order to get the most punch and the most definition from that sound, we want to have those things happening in a phase correlated manner. A typical example would be if we have a microphone on the top of the snare drum and a microphone on the bottom of the snare drum. We want those two microphones to be phase correlated. We want them to be picking up their sound at the same time with the correct polarity, and that's going to create the strongest amount of punch. However, because of the way phase and time interact, one, time alignment is not necessarily the same thing as phase alignment, and two, time alignment sometimes has some drawbacks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this little drum recording here, and I'm going to show you what happens when I bring in phase alignment on just the close mics, and then what happens when I bring in phase alignment on the close mics to the overhead. Okay. All right, so that's just the raw capture. Sounds pretty good. Let's bring in phase alignment on my kick sub, which is now being aligned to the kick in and kick out, and the snare bottom being aligned to the snare top. And instantly much punchier. I have not changed the level or gain of anything at all. As you can see right here, I'm just monitoring from the sub itself, so there's no change to level. Let's take those out again, play them again. I think that difference is pretty readily apparent, right? Pretty dramatic improvement. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to align all of the close mics with the overheads. Let's see how that sounds. So right off the bat, it sounds much punchier, and there's a very, very clear definition to all of the close mics, right? I'm going to before and after as I play it back. Right, so it's pretty obvious. That said, there's a little bit of a drawback, and it's a little less apparent, because the first thing we hear is how much more punch there is, right? Our ears tune into level, our ears tune into apparent loudness and things like that, and so the punch is immediately very striking. There's no change to the gain structure here, by the way. Again, this is just phase alignment. But the dimension of the drums seems to kind of become a little bit flatter. It becomes a little bit more two-dimensional in the stereo field. So now what I want you to do is listen one more time, but this time ignore punch and just try to listen for depth. It feels flatter. So here's the thing. There is no right or wrong in this particular situation. Sometimes there's a clear better and there's a clear worse. In this particular case, it's negotiable. For me, as an engineer, I believe that I can get all of that punch and all of that snap and definition without having to do phase alignment going from the close mics to the overheads. Will it ever get as punchy as it could potentially ever get? No, I don't think so. But I do personally feel that preserving the three-dimensional image, the depth of the record, is going to be more important and more impactful for the end listener at the end of the day. That said, there are fantastic engineers out there who would disagree with me. There are certain genres in particular where tight alignment of phase to get that maximum amount of punch is exactly what is helping to sell the record. So there is not necessarily a right or wrong. In fact, if you want to comment in the comments section below how you feel about it, then let me know. And again, if you say that you prefer the punchier sound because it's just so much harder hitting, I don't think that's an incorrect answer. It is a tough decision sometimes. Okay, now let's go over the principles and techniques and examine some of this stuff. I want to jump into the kick in and the kick sub alignment right here. So let's just go to the kick drums alone. All right, so the way I have this set up, I'm using waves in phase, and there's a bunch of different plugins that can do this. Waves in phase is one. Another great one is SoundRadix Auto Align. I like in phase because it gives me more independent control of what I'm doing. That said, independent control is not always a good thing. I would say if you're very familiar with this process, or you want to really drill your skills and get good at this process, waves in phase is probably the way to go. SoundRadix Auto Align, you will never get something that sounds bad. It will pretty much always sound good. Waves in phase, you can absolutely mess it up because you have finer control of it. But I've done this probably hundreds of times at this point. So for me, this is very second nature. I'm very familiar with the process. Basically, what's going on here is I've got the kick in being sent out bus 7 in pre-fader send, which means even if I have kick in muted, this is still being routed at full level. And in phase here is on the kick sub, but it's being keyed by bus 7. So basically, the kick in is running into the side chain of in phase, while in phase is on the kick sub. If that makes sense. So here it gives me two channels. I have my alpha channel and I have my sidechain channel. My alpha channel here is my kick sub. And my sidechain channel is going to be the kick in. As we can see, it's a lot louder. Now, the mono mix is going to give us a blend of both. So that's what we're going to monitor because we're trying to get the best relationship for the mono mix. Now, here we can blow up this right here, and you can see here our alpha channel, the kick sub, it's a sine wave with texture to it, right? It's mostly just low-end frequency. Here, the sidechain here, the kick in, has a lot more going on. It's a much more complex sound. We're going to be manipulating the alpha channel. We're manipulating the kick sub to get the best phase alignment with the sidechain, the kick in. Now, there's a couple things that we can do. We can either try to move this back in time to correlate, and you see that our meter is turning blue, or we could move it back in time to get greater decorrelation and then flip the polarity. So if we examine this mic right here, we can see that the start times of the wave formation should probably be about the same place. So here, this is just delaying it for the sake of the correlation of different sine waves. It's not really what we're trying to do, and we don't get the same kind of correlation that we want. The better move in this particular case is to get this so that it's as out of phase as possible, but starting at around the same time, and then flip the polarity. And when we do that, which is what I've got set up on my other channel over here, we get a much better phase relationship. So let's do our before and then our after with mono mixes. There we go. So you hear that the drum becomes a lot smackier, the transient becomes a lot more defined, the actual content of what is in the drum recording becomes a lot more defined. And so now when I switch this over and I monitor only the alpha channel, I can bring in the kick in, and we can go from before and after. We get a lot more punch that way. And because the kick in and kick out are already very correlated, it also makes a big difference when all three kick captures are in, before and after. That's a pretty big difference, right? Now, let's examine the relationship between the kick sum and the overheads. So here I have a very similar setup where I have the kicks going into this channel, this bus channel here, and then I have in phase on it, and it's receiving signal from the overheads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo up the kicks, and I'm going to solo the overhead. And then we're going to do a little before and after. Doesn't help if the kick is not playing when I do that. Now, if I set this up so that we trigger it here with a capture, if I then zoom in on a kick, all right, let's pull up this one. There we go. What I'm going to do is, we can see that the kick is hitting a little bit earlier than the overhead, so I'm going to slide it later in time. And you can see my correlation meter here is going into the blue. That means positive. I'm going to keep sliding it. If we look closely, there we go. We see that there's a very similar transient here. I'm going to line these transients up. Let's go right there. Let's line these up. Interesting. Interesting. Notice that when I line these up, I don't necessarily get the most phase correlated sound. Is it more phase correlated? Yes, absolutely. However, we'll notice that it is not the actual best relationship on the meter. I actually need to pull it so that it's not completely in time to get the absolute best relationship. Here, we're actually losing definition. So I'm going to set it to where the correlation meter is telling me this is the best place to go, which is right here. And in this particular case, my ears are telling me the same thing as my meter here, that this is, in fact, the best relationship between the two. And the reason why I wanted to demonstrate this little discrepancy is because if we were to simply line it up by time alignment, it's not necessarily going to give us the best phase alignment. And I think that without one of these tools, the temptation is to simply line it up by transient. And if you line it up by transient, you are going to get something that is fairly phase correlated, but it's not necessarily going to be the most ideal phase correlation because every sound is actually a composite of different sine waves that are all happening at different times. So just because things visually look like they're lining up doesn't mean that the primary fundamental tones that are making up those sounds are actually lined up. It's not quite the same. It's a little technically weird, but it is something that's important to keep in mind. So anyway, so I ended up landing here at 132 samples and switched it to the alpha channel. And there's our before and after. Before. After. All right, guys, so I just wanted to do that demonstration. It's some good food for thought right there. Anyway, if you dig what I'm doing here on this channel, hit that like button if you want to catch more videos like that. Hit subscribe with the bell notification so that you get notified. And if you think that there's somebody who would benefit from this video, hit that share button. Let the drummer in your life know what I think about phase alignment. All right, guys, you know the drill. We are musicians. Sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.